Hey, welcome everybody to the third video, the third part. Now, in the previous two parts, we talked about a simple object of JSON and then how we write the code to decode the data. And then we talked about the second example was a similar, a more complex object with an array. In this one, we will talk about what about a scenario where you have actually an object with an array, but we have another object embedded into the original object. So we have an object called, an attribute called department, but this department is actually made of several attributes itself. So how do we handle these type of scenarios in JSON and Swift 4? Now, if you go to the view controller, this is our view controller. Remember, the steps were to create a structure, and then we have this function that we've created, we copied, and then this function basically has the steps that you need to do. You get the data, create a decoder object, decode the data into the structure, and then process the data. So we're gonna do the same thing again, but here it's a little bit different. I have a structure with the array, which is similar to what we have. This is the structure with the array, but with the object, we have one more thing, which is basically I have the age, and I have the experience, and I have the object itself. Okay, so what you need to do, we're gonna create a structure that represents this object first. All right, so we're gonna go to the view controller. We're going to create a structure. So that structure is going to say struct department and it is again decodable. Okay, inside that structure should have the stuff that we have in that structure here. So I'm going to copy this just to be in the safe side. Go back to the view controller. I'm going to copy him here, so at least I will type them correctly. All right. This is a string. This is a string. And this is a string. I could have typed it, but this is the, in programming, all you're trying to do most of the time is to reduce errors. And this is one way to reduce the errors and don't have to worry about looking up these field names. Okay. So that is the internal object. It's called department and it has the following attribute. Okay. And the all right, so this is the internal object. Okay, so what about the external object, the parent objects? What do we need to do? So we can create something similar to this, and let me just show you here. So I'm going to create struct, and then I'm going to call it employee, and then this one we're going to call it with object. All right, employee object, or let's call it with object. And it is it's called decodable again. So what are the fields inside this new object? Now, if you go back to the data, I have name, age, experience, and department. I can copy all of these because we have the name and the age and the experience as an array. Or simply, I'm just going to take the name and the age and not worry about the array because we've done the array in the previous example. Well, I just might as well do it all. All right. So I'm going to copy these just to make sure that I got the names correctly. We go back in here, and then here I will say v. So this is the name, var age, and then var experience, we have one more thing. All these are strings. This is an array of strings, sorry. Array of strings. All right. And then this is int. And this is a string again. Sorry, this is taking longer than what I anticipated, but it's all right. A string here. All right. The last thing that is different than the previous example is that now we have an object inside this object. So what do we do? So that object was actually that field called department. You see that? It's called DEP. So we go in here and then we call that DEP. But what is the type of that? The type of this object is this object that we've created, or this structure that we've created. So this should say department. You got that? That's the difference. All right. So we have the traditional, the stuff that we had before with the array, and now we have an object or a structure that we defined here. Okay, object, structure, same thing in here. So we have the structure is this structure, department is the internal structure, which has field by itself, which is the department, the location, and then the head of that department. Now, how do we read it? How do we process this? You read it the same way we've done the other ones. So you go in here. We already got an example 1 and 2. I can do example 3. Here's, we can copy the same steps that we've done before. Command copy. Then I'm going to put them in here. Okay, so if you don't remember what we've done here, I highly advise you to watch the first video, because in the first video we covered all of this. Okay, so it's example 3. Now the file name is with array and object. Okay, so that's the file name. Now this is the do, the decoder, create the decoder object, decode the data instead of employee with array. What is the structure name here now? It's called employee with object. Okay, so I can copy this guy here, just do that. This is an example 3. Where is example 3? Here's example 3, and this is employee with object. Okay, the rest is the same. This will give you the name. This will give you the experience. And now how do we get the data from that department? So the way you do it, you just simply say print, and then say result dot. Do you see that? I have a department object structure. Inside of it, I have, for example, the department name. All right, you can do the same thing with the other ones. Okay, the other field. Department, and that instead of name, you can do the location. All right. So that is a third, more complex object, but very, very, very useful. So now if you do compile, we need to call this function, which is function 3 instead of function 2, example 3. I go back into the load function. The load, view did load, and now I get, instead of example 2, I'm gonna call example 3, just to test it, and let's see what happens. And we should get the data like we intended. Yep, we did. You see that? That's the name. Those are the experience from the array. And this is the data from that department. Just to recap what we did quickly, we have Sometimes you receive nested objects data from in your JSON feed. And how do we handle these nested objects? The way you do it, you create a structure for the inner object. You then create a structure for the outer object, and then you reference this structure that you created here. And that's what we did in the code. First, we created the department structured object. It has a department name, location, and head. Third, then we created the external structure, and we referenced that department inside. And then what we did is that in the code, we followed the same previous two examples. We called this one example 3. And again, watch the first video in case you have not, first and the second video in case you have missed, in case you don't understand this part. What we have here, you get the data, whether it's from a feed or from a file. You create the decoder, then you decode the data into this, decode the data into the new structure that we've just created. Then you process the data. We get this is from the parent object. This is the array from the parent object. This is the nested object called department, and you got your example. Now you almost there. You got basically the 3 different ways that you can process data. The last video I show you how to read array of objects. How do you store them? And this would be helpful, like if you want to display a list of data from a feed into a table of view controller, or you're doing some aggregation, whatever. This is the next video should help you quite a bit with that. I'll see you in the next and the final video.